And welcome back.
It's good to be back with you again. Last for the evening.
Woo! All right, we're making it one session at a time. Live. Here we go. So we got last session of the evening. We are going to do another giveaway, and this time I want you to write the word seed time in the chat. Seed time. And the giveaway this time is going to be, any of you guess? We're going to do another earth medicine bag. So this was extremely popular today, and it's actually our sponsor for today. And so we'll be sharing a little video of them in just a second here. But the earth medicine is a cow manure that has been gone through an extra process that basically turns it into these little pellets. It's not pelletized like with a machine, but it is gone through an additional drying and rolling process that ends up in these little pellets and make it very easy to use on your lawn, like you can see here, or in your garden, and claims some pretty amazing results. So
pelletized and kind of encapsulated.
Yeah.
In these little pellets. But it's full of biology.
One of the things that I think is cool about it, we have not personally tried it yet, but one of the things that I think is cool about it is that they say you only have to put it on twice a year, which a lot of fertilizers and stuff like that, they're going to be telling you to put it on like way more than that. And they say that you only have to use it less and less over time. So give it a try. Well, I don't know. Give it a try and see how it works. I'm going to play.
Yeah, we have some. We're going to try it, but we received it in the middle of winter, and there's not much you can show when you're trying it out in the middle of winter.
I'll tell you what it does remind me of is in regenerative grazing, you put your cows on a small portion of land intensively, and they leave, a bunch of manure, and then you're going to move those cows on, and you're not going to bring them back to that same portion to graze again for a decent amount of time, for months. And so it reminds me a little bit like that, because you've got the cow manure, you're putting it on, and then you just let it go for quite a while, and you let that life just take over. And all right, I'm going to play a short video from them, and then we will draw the winner. Yeah, so click the link below on this page to grab 10% off of your own earth medicine bag. And someone is going to win one right now. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. And the winner is, who's it going to be? Dun, dun. And it is Zoe.
Zoe
Akhtar. All right. Zoe, please send us an email to support@seedtime.us, and we will make
congratulations
sure that you get your earth medicine bag. Yes, huge congratulations. All right. Now we are going to introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Briana Bosch. And Briana is a passionate regenerative gardener, farmer, dedicated to sustainable agriculture and to soil health. And she shares her expertise in workshops. She has a YouTube channel. She has a deep commitment to restoring the land. and she has pioneered eco-friendly practices on her family farm. I'm sure she's going to probably tell a little bit more of her story, but we're going to go ahead and bring Briana up. Briana, welcome.
Hey guys, it's so good to be back.
So happy to have you.
Yeah, we're absolutely stoked to have you back with us. And before I forget, I'm just going to tell those in the chat, feel free once again to ask questions during the session. We're going to be starring them. We'll come back for a Q&A. But yeah, glad to have you, Briana, and we're ready to turn the time over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been, I've been using Seed Time now since almost this time last year. And we do have a couple videos over on our YouTube kind of showing how we use it and how we incorporate it with all of our plans, especially in terms of things that we'll be talking about today with cover cropping. So make sure you pop over there to our YouTube channel as well if you want to see more about how we incorporate Seed Time. But today we're going to be mostly talking about the plastic-free garden and becoming more self-sufficient in the garden, and also being plastic-free at the same time. So when I say plastic-free, I mean mostly plastic-free. And that's because, and I get this question all the time, so I just want to put it out there before we even start, which is I always get the question about, well, do you use any plastics? And yes, because in market farming, there are still a couple places where we just haven't been able to figure out how to eliminate it. Predominantly, we're talking about things like irrigation. We're always working on it, but where we can, we have eliminated it. And most of the time, it's actually resulted in far better systems and practices in soil health and all kinds of different benefits, aside from just being plastic free. So I'm going to talk a little bit about us first. And we have a couple of farms. This is me. I am 6 years into my market farming experience here, which means that we sell from our farm. We don't just produce for YouTube. I actually do farm, and we do sell to the public. Plastic-free, sustainable mindset, and regenerative as well. So this is our farm, an aerial view. Blossom and Branch Farm is our farm name. We are a regenerative flower farm. This is about the scale. You can see the lower half of the photo here is dedicated bird habitat, actually wildlife habitat, and that is dedicated to the ecosystem that kind of helps our farm running without a lot of inputs. We have sheep and we have chickens that kind of graze that area down there. And of course, we use that as fertilizer and as inputs. And then the top half is where we have our annual plants, a lot of perennial plants. You can see the edges are a lot of native plants, which help bring in things like beneficial insects. We talk about all of these things on our channel, and building ecosystem and how important that is. That's not what today is about. But that's our home farm there. That's where we live. And that's mostly retail oriented. And then we have our other farm, which we've termed Landing Field Farm. And this is a very fun and terrifying project that we've been working on, which is scaling all of these things up. All of the practices that we've been working on here on our small farm, it's an acre, so in terms of farming, it's fairly small. And Landing Field Farm is 180 acres. And so we are working on scaling all these practices up. And we're starting this year. We are working with a couple of great names, John Kemp from Advancing Eco Ag, Green Cover Seed. There's quite a few companies who are helping us do this. And we are going non-GMO. We are trying to go organic and incorporating a lot of these principles, because what we hear all the time is, well, great, you can do this on a small scale, but you can't scale it up. So we're seeing if that's true or not. But plastic-free specifically, and why we are plastic-free. This is a picture of my farm, and I do like to show this because I am very upfront with the fact that I have farmed in both ways, and I have gardened in both ways. I have gardened in the way that has been kind of pushed on us by the commodification of the garden industry, which is incorporating a lot of plastic products. And I have also farmed without those things. And what has happened to our soil, what has happened to our production, what has happened to my costs have been nothing but beneficial as we've eliminated these plastic products. So I like to share about it. So we did start out using landscape fabric, and that's when I learned how bad it was, because I saw the effects on my soil. So usually with landscape fabric in, for example, the landscape industry, it is applied. It's usually applied under rocks or sometimes under mulch, which is a bad practice anyway. But it's meant to keep weeds down, and usually it's not exposed. Now in market farming, and this is why you see pictures of this all the time, it's used on top of the soil as a physical mulch, as a barrier to weeds. Usually it's pulled up at the end of the year, and then it's put back down in the spring, and that has to happen for it to be organic compliant. So that's when soil gets amended, is usually after it's removed and then put back down. So what we would do in the fall is we pull it up. And what I started to notice is after 2 years of this, when I would pull it up in the fall, the soil looked terrible. It was cracked, it was compacted. You could tell it had been exposed to quite a lot of heat, and the life was going down. So whereas we felt like with all the work that we were doing, it should have been getting better, all the compost we were applying, that wasn't happening. So I kind of stepped back and I said, is this really, is this the best thing? Is there a different way to do this? And so we started with half the field. We stopped applying the fabric and we pulled it up. And what I found was that on that half of the field where we started incorporating these practices, everything looked so much better. And actually it was less work. And people don't believe that. They think that the landscape fabric is going to help them. But what not applying landscape fabric helped me to do was to not have to bring in compost, to not have to bring in as much fertilizer. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. But why go plastic free in your garden? Obviously, we're talking about this on a market farm scale, but it does apply to the home garden. So soils now contain more microplastics than the world's oceans. And this is a shocking statistic for a lot of people, because when we hear microplastics and microplastic contamination, most of us think the ocean. And while that is true, that is happening, it is also happening in the world's soils. And what's the downside of that is that we are finding that those microplastics do have an effect on the soil life. So while I'm talking about landscape fabric, there are a lot of ways that this happens in our home gardens as well. And that's because a lot of what we do in home gardening is influenced by what's happening on market farm scales. A lot of the educators that we have in this realm right now are market farmers. And so we teach what we do, and home gardeners pick these things up. So landscape fabric, while we call it fabric, it's actually not fabric. It's polypropylene, and yes, even biodegradable landscape film that we plow into the soil also tends to contain microplastics. It is a petroleum product, and it has been shown to accumulate in soils over time. So that's one source of plastics in soil. Another source is grow bags and plastic pots. So grow bags are typically made with recycled PET, which is usually made from plastic water bottles. And this has a lot of downsides, mostly leaching, and especially fabric. So when we're talking about a soft plastic, like a fabric, and you guys have probably heard a lot of this recently, people talking about microplastic shedding from clothing being a large contributor of microplastics to our oceans. The same thing happens when we're growing in plastic grow bags. Obviously, the shedding of fibers happens a lot more readily with grow bags than with hard plastics. But we also have things like seed trays. And seed trays are now increasingly being made with recycled plastics, which sounds like a great thing, but is a classic form of greenwashing, in my opinion, because what happens with plastic recycling is that it's actually a dirtier process than even creating virgin plastic. Because of the grinding process that happens in plastic recycling, there's a grinding down of things. A lot of microplastics are released during that process. By some estimates, it's almost a third of the entire plastics recycled actually get released as microplastics. And then also, it's a lot of dirty products that go into recycled plastic. So when we're looking at, for example, a recycled plastic black seed tray, it's the same thing that we've probably been hearing over and over about, for example, recycled black plastic spatulas and how we shouldn't be using that in cooking right now. And it's because the recycled plastic is very ambiguous. We don't really know what's going into it, but a lot of times it's recycled electronics, which contain things like dioxins and flame retardants. We don't want those things meshing with our soil. So another source is bagged soils and bottled fertilizers, bagged fertilizers. In shipping and when sitting out, they're often exposed to a lot of UV, and that's what is a recipe for leaching. So yes, and I know that you're thinking, I thought plastics were safe for growing in because we've been told this over and over. Well, we also have been told that a lot of things were safe for a long time, and this is especially true with plastic, and that now we're finding out it's actually not. Plasticizers and phthalates are great examples of those, that they have been considered safe by the FDA. And in fact, they are allowed at low levels in even our food safe plastics. And now we're finding that the rate of leaching is much more than we thought. And I kind of included a clip here from a couple studies. Please feel free to do your own research. We have a lot of research out there, mostly on our Instagram page as well, about this, but that the phthalates in particular are endocrine disruptors. And yes, they are uptaken by plant roots. So This is where it gets into that hairy, right? Yes, we know, we probably can surmise that plastic is making its way into soil when we're growing within plastic or we're using plastic mulches. But does it matter, right? Does that get taken up into our food? And yes, so let's think about when plastic leaching happens, which is in the condition of two things, in the presence of two things. One is UV rays and heat, and the other one is moisture. So if we think about when we're growing in our garden or when we're seed starting or any of those things, what conditions do we have present? Moisture and heat. So this again is a recipe for if there is anything that is going to leach from our seed trays or from our plastic mulches, it's going to happen in the condition that we're growing. And so there are a lot of studies that are happening now, less so here in the US, but more in China and Europe, where they are actually doing a lot of studies about how these microplastics work their way into soils and how they do get uptaken into plants and they do make their way into produce. So while yes, the containers that they're shipped in, all of those things, the gloves that they're touched with, all of that has an impact down the line, but it also starts at soil level. So all of this to say, and here's just a, if you're a sciencey type of person like I am, I always like to show, this is what it looks like when microplastics, which are represented by these little red dots, get taken in either by the roots or they're absorbed by the leaves. There's multiple ways that this can happen. And here's what that looks like. So now that we've gotten through this, okay, my point is this. If plastic contamination is cumulative, which we know that it is, then why risk it if we don't have to? And this is what I like to get to is that, yes, sure, I know there's the argument that there's plastics everywhere. There's plastics in our water. There's plastics, microplastics on our clothing. There's microplastics on our carpets. All of this absolutely is true, and we should be trying to eliminate that in our own personal lives as much as we can. However, it is cumulative. So if we don't have to use it, if there are other better ways, why not do that, right? What is the harm in using alternatives? So what are the alternatives? Okay, something has to change, right? We know that something has to change in the way that we're marketed to. Something has to change in this process that we've been thinking about how we start seeds, how we garden, how we block weeds for the last, at least 30 years or so. Let's kind of switch back to maybe some ways that we used to do things. So there are some great alternatives when we're talking about seed starting. And we talk about these things all of the time. The great thing is that if you incorporate these things, these materials last much longer than a lot of the plastics. We're not having to worry about the leaching. So soil blocking is a great way. We talk about soil blocking a lot on our channel, which is basically making cubes of soil. You can see a soil blocker here on the bottom image. This is what it looks like when you stamp out a cube of soil. And yes, they do hold together. You bottom water them so that they don't fall apart. And after a couple of weeks, what happens is the roots work their way into the blocks. They hold the blocks together. No, they don't crumble. No, they don't fall apart. They are actually much healthier and they perform better in the garden. So not only are we avoiding the plastic issue when we switch to soil blocking, we also are getting better plants that are going to be more drought tolerant, more pest tolerant. Yes, there is a little bit of an adjustment. If you are switching from plastic trays to soil blocking, they do dry out a little bit faster than you're probably used to. So there is a little bit more high maintenance in terms of water. But there is another alternative that we've been doing a lot of. Sorry, this picture got distorted, but which is wood trays. And wood trays is not a new idea by any means. This is how nurseries used to grow seedlings pre-plastic, right? There was a time that we grew seedlings and we did not have plastic cell trays. And what we did was wood trays. Wood trays have so many benefits. One being that with the issue with soil blocking that happens with dry out, and this is very common in home gardening, is that most of us don't have our whole lives dedicated to taking care of our seedlings, right? We can't be checking on them multiple times a day. We have other lives, and that's fine. Wood trays have an advantage here because they hold moisture better and longer than soil blocks do. So when we're looking at a wood tray, what I usually do is I line the bottom with wool, actually, because we have sheep and that adds a slow release nitrogen. You don't have to do that, but it does help if you're worried about leaking or the moisture getting down and onto the wood tray. And we just top it with soil and then we plant our seeds right in. It's really very easy. When it's time to transplant, we scoop those seedlings out with a spoon, we pop them into the dirt, done. These last a very long time. We typically treat them with shosugiban, and you can see that on our channel, which is just a Japanese method of charring the wood, which makes it more waterproof. So these will last at least a decade because they're not sitting wet all year. You know, when we're looking at a wood bed and a cedar raised bed, and we treat our cedar raised beds this way too, but if you char it, it's going to last much longer. It's sitting dry most of the year. It's able to dry out. It's not constantly wet. Here's what it looks like when we soil block. Now, I do still do a lot of soil blocking just because we start almost 14,000 seeds every year. And so I need space conservation, and that's where soil blocks really shine. You can see how many we can just fit on one shelf here. One of these trays holds 280 seedlings. So we're able to really start a lot. So that's a good seedling alternative. And then when we're getting into things like landscape fabric alternatives, so if you are someone who has grown with landscape fabric or are thinking about it, what are some alternatives? This is a great one. Even if you're not considering growing with landscape fabric, we should be incorporating cover cropping into the garden. And I'm anticipating getting a lot of questions on this at the end, so don't worry, we'll do Q&A. But I call it growing my own mulch, because to me, cover cropping intimidates people. They think this is just for farmers, and it's not. It really is for anyone who has soil and wants that soil to be healthy and productive. So I call it growing my own mulch because that's what I do now instead of landscape fabric. So we are reducing how much we're having to fertilize because we are feeding the microbial soil life and the soil food web, which gives us things like rhizophagy. It gives us things like a mycorrhizal hyphae, like a food web that is able to go out and seek out nutrients and bring them back to the plants without us having to add all of that to the soil. Given we do still fertilize a little bit with nitrogen, but that's pretty much the only thing that we add anymore. And I'll go over how we do that too. And what we do, this is what it looks like when we do add in a cover crop. So this is hairy vetch, and we seeded this in the fall. It overwintered in my zone 5. And then in spring, we terminate it. So it looks like this. It starts regrowing quite early. You can see we have a perennial crop to the left, which is Baptisia. And that is that blooms for us toward the end of May. And so that's when this hairy vetch is blooming. That's when we terminate it. And then after that, we're left with this. So this is what it looks like after we've terminated that hairy vetch. And terminate just means to kill it. So we have to kill the cover crop before it goes to seed so that it doesn't create a weedy, seedy mess. So we kill it at the right stage, which is usually at flowering stage. So if you look at this stage, you can see the purple flowers here on that vetch. That's when it's time for us to kill it. We kill it back, and then we just seed right into it. So here you can see some seeds popping up and out of that mulch. And what we do is on our farm, we rotate half and half. So you can think of this as a raised garden bed situation. So think if you have 2 4x8 beds, for example. One 4x8 bed is going to be dedicated to summer producers. So things like tomatoes, squash, zinnia, that's what we would be seeding into something like this situation. So for example, we seeded our cover crop in fall. We overwintered it. We terminated it in spring. And then this is right about 2 weeks after last frost is what we're looking at when these seedlings are going in. So for me, that's warm crop things that need warm soil are what are going to be going into that bed at that time. On the other raised bed, the other 4x8 bed that I was talking about, if we have 2, right? One is those summer producers, those things that need the warm soil. The other one is going to be early spring producers. So here, about 6 weeks before our last frost in that bed, we're going to have our cool producers. So things like peas, lettuces, beets, radish, kale, spinach, those things are going to be going into that cool season bed. And then after that bed is done producing, we cover crop that bed in late summer. So that one would get then a cover crop of maybe oats and peas. And then that mulch sits there over the winter, and that serves as the mulch. So what we always have is either living roots in the soil via growing our mulch in that off season, or we have living roots in the soil for production plant. But I try to rotate. Half my field is what I'm considering warm season producers, and then half is the cool season producers. And whatever one is not growing a production crop at that time is getting a cover crop, growing my own mulch. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I know you guys have questions on it. It's very confusing to think about. Cover cropping can be intimidating, but yes, it can be done in most zones. And I hear this all the time. My growing season is too short. I can't do this. Absolutely false. We have a short growing season. We have a very inconsistent growing season here next to the Rockies. We're in Colorado. Sometimes we get a super early frost. Sometimes we get a super late frost. Sometimes we get a snowstorm in June. You can still incorporate cover cropping and growing your own mulch. The key is including your shoulder seasons. So 6 weeks before your last frost, 6 weeks after your last frost. And in fact, we have a cover crop that is still growing that should have died back in December, but we've had a warm winter. And we have been growing 2-3 months past our frost because we're using cold tolerant cover crops, things that can germinate in cold, things that will still continue to grow in cold temperatures. All right, so we've got, now that we've talked about a little bit about that, let's talk about some grow bag plastic pot alternatives. So when we're talking about plastics, again, we'll talk a little bit about this, but in my opinion, the best thing to do is always to grow in your own soil. And I know that you're thinking, well, I have fill dirt, I have clay, I have rocks, I have blah, blah, blah. People have grown in your environment before in the ground for a long time and been successful at it. We just have to get back to learning how to amend our own soil. When you think about how much soil we're dumping into a raised bed, you could do that in your own soil, right? So it doesn't have to be in this raised bed situation where we're spending a couple $100s to create the frame for our bed. We don't have to do that. And that also brings in the issue of all of these bagged soils. So when we were talking about plastic leaching, plastic contamination, this happens a lot with bagged soils because they're often shipped. They are sitting out there being exposed to UV rays. And a lot of times, by the time those composts and those bagged soils get into our gardens, they're microbially very compromised because they've been exposed to so much heat. So when we're talking about grow bags, there are great alternatives, things like wool, jute, burlap. There's a great company called Sustainagrow out of New Zealand that's making wool grow bags that are really phenomenal. They don't last quite as long as the polyester ones, right? So you'll probably want to put something underneath them, like a terracotta tray or something. At the end of the season, it's likely the bottom will be rotted out. But in the garden, let's think about things that maybe are biodegradable as being a good thing, right? So talking about fertilizer and bagged soil alternatives, we already mentioned, but whenever possible, trying to use our in-ground soil and being mindful of using soil directly adjacent to foundations. So I hear this one, what about contamination? Should I be worried about heavy metals, et cetera, et cetera? If you are, go ahead and get a soils test. It's a good idea, especially if you're growing kind of around the foundation of older homes because they were often painted with lead paint that would chip off and get into the soil. So do a lead paint test or a lead test or a heavy metal soils test if you're concerned. And yes, in-ground soil is likely going to require some amending. I'm not saying that everybody's soil right now, as we're sitting here at our computers, is ready to go to grow in. Absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm well aware that there's going to need to be some amending that does happen. But again, if we're looking at if we're going to be doing a raised bed versus if we're going to be doing in-ground, it's probably going to be the same amount. But there are some ways that we minimize having to buy bagged soils, and that's a lot of that is via the cover cropping. And then there's a couple other things that we do. So if you are growing in the ground, step one obviously is going to be removing your vegetation. So every method has pros and cons, and we tend to get attached to dogmas in this realm of, oh, I'm no-till, or I am, permaculture, or I am a solarizer, or whatever. I'm a no-dig gardener. It does not have to be the same for every garden that you start. It does not have to be that I'm attached to no-till and then therefore I'm never going to till. Each method of removing vegetation is going to have pros and cons, okay? It comes down to what is going to work best for you, given your context. So when we're looking at some of the methods that we have, there's solarization, which is just, you've probably heard of this one. It's where we put a big tarp over. We let the heat kind of kill the vegetation. That obviously has a couple downsides. One is that it's using a lot of plastic. And the other one is that there are impacts to the microbial life underneath that plastic tarp due to the UV exposure and the heat and all of that stuff. There's smothering, which you've probably heard as no-dig gardening, or the lasagna method, where we're doing cardboard sheets typically and then layered with compost on top. There is a lot of concerns with cardboard in terms of oxygen permeability. It is going to have an impact on soil microbial health. So if we're looking at doing no dig because we don't want to disturb the soil, that's not necessarily what happens. When we're smothering out that soil life, we're not impacting that microbial life, if that makes sense. There is still an impact. There's sod removal where you just rent a sod cutter and you take out the dirt and the sod and you shake it off and you leave that in. That's a lot of work. And then there's also tillage, and where you basically do the same thing. You're turning the dirt a couple of times to kind of kill whatever is there and then planting into it. Both those methods have a higher labor input. So again, it's doing what works best for you given your situation. What can you realistically do? And then committing to regenerative practices as you go forward. Okay, so don't get too hung up in what is the right way to start my garden bed and panic about, what's the impact on soil life. You can regrow it. Now, that being said, we've done testing on this, both microscopically and also via Haney soils tests, which are kind of the regenerative guide to figuring out what's happening on the soil respiration level in soil. And we did 3 different methods. In the back of this picture, you'll see a tillage, and then this bed was covered with a cover crop. So we tilled to remove the grass, then we did a cover crop, did not add anything. The middle one was a no dig, so cardboard topped with compost. And then the foreground, we had a lasagna bed. So you can kind of see some of the grass under there. We did a cardboard, then layers of grass and some dead greens and browns and greens and browns. When we ran these through the Haney soils test, it was very interesting because the beds that had the lowest levels of respiration, which indicates how much soil life there is in the soil, the lasagna bed and the no-dig bed performed the worst, and the bed that we tilled performed the best in terms of microbial life that was present after preparing the bed. So it's not as detrimental to soil life as you might think to do a one-time till to establish your garden. So don't get hung up in that tillage is bad and I can't do it. That's not always the case. All right, so step 2, once you've removed whatever method you're going to use, okay, I'm not going to judge you. Whatever method you used, you're going to next want to measure out your beds and your walkways. So for beds, I like to do a 30 to 36 inch wide. That's a good width that you can still reach across and harvest. And then at least about 24 inches for walkways. Make sure you can get a wheelbarrow up and down. That's important for amending and also for harvesting. And then I just shovel out the soil from what's going to be my walkway space up and onto what's going to be my bed space. So yes, there's some soil disturbance that's happening here. Yes, there is a little bit of work that's happening here, but you're creating essentially a raised bed in place, and you don't have to have sides to that raised bed. Okay, it does not have to be contained within a beautiful, neat little package. If you want to, you could put some reclaimed bricks. You could do some wattle fencing, which I think I have a picture of here later in our little journey. And this is what it looks like once we've done that. So you can see we've actually mulched the walkways in this picture. So there's wood chip mulch in the walkways. And then in the beds, we have just the soil that we scooped up and off the ground and mounded the soil that way. So that's helped with drainage because we do have red clay. We're heavy Colorado clay. This helps with drainage, just even mounding the soil. We did do this space without doing much amending at all. But if you do feel like you need to amend, and of course, it's always wise to do a soils test the first year. I would not soils test every year. Seems like overkill to me. If you're doing good practices and not over adding fertilizer and not adding too much, you shouldn't really need to do a soils test every year. But the first time it can be helpful because it'll tell you what do things look like, what does your pH look like, are there certain things you can't grow based on that pH level. For example, our soil is pretty alkaline. We run around 7.7, 7.8. So I can't do blueberries, for example. But it will tell you, if you need potassium or if your phosphorus is high, which is much more common than having low phosphorus, by the way, especially if you use a lot of compost. It is highly likely that your soil is already going to be high in phosphorus, in which case you would not want to use things like bloom fertilizers because that's going to add to way too much phosphorus. All right. If you can't afford a soils test, always safe to just add no more than 1 or 2 inches of compost. And then we have an alfalfa fertilizer recipe that I do like to use. This is good because it's got a nitrogen. It has organic matter in it. So it's not just a liquid fertilizer, actually a fertilizer that contains some kind of organic matter in it is going to perform better in the garden. And so that's why we use that. And then alfalfa also has a natural plant growth hormone in it. So it helps with the growth of your plants. So this is the recipe. You guys can screenshot this if you like. It's also on our website, I believe. So you just start with alfalfa pellets from the feed store, and you mix in some warm water, a little bit of molasses to feed the soil life, and then a handful of active compost or just soil, anywhere that looks good and healthy in your garden. Just take a scoop of soil and add it in. So we're kind of adding some microbial life to this fertilizer as well. And then we're applying that to the soil. And there's a picture. So in this picture also, you can see the wattle fencing I was talking about, where we don't do really sides to our raised beds. This is just sticks woven in and out of sticks. So, all right. So that's a little bit about the alfalfa fertilizer and some ways you can amend your ingrown soil. Seed inoculation. Inoculation is not just, and you can use that alfalfa fertilizer as well for pots. If you're a container gardener, you can still use that same recipe. Seed inoculation. Okay, inoculation is a very confusing term. And no, it's not just for legumes, even though we do talk about it with legumes, because there is a certain rhizobia that we add. We literally do this with our hands. We got to mix it in and get it onto the seed. And that helps that legume fixate nitrogen from the air and put it into the plant roots so it performs better. But it's not just for legumes. You can inoculate any seed with microbes, with mycorrhiza. Legumes need rhizobia. And then if you're adding an inoculant to other seeds, so tomatoes, cucumbers, zinnias, sunflowers, all of those things can be inoculated with something called azospirillum. And azospirillum is another nitrogen fixer for non-legume plants. So if we can apply that directly to our seed and help our seeds start out with the best microbial life, then we're going to have to apply less. So when we're talking about reducing plastic use in the garden by reducing fertilizers and reducing things like bagged compost and bagged soils, inoculant is a great way to start because it's a very, very direct, very targeted application. Homemade compost also. So yes, there are products that you can buy from companies that make these things. And John Kemp's company, Advancing Eco Ag, does make a product called BioCoat Gold. That's a great one. But if you can't afford this is all about self-sufficiency, right? So if you have a compost pile at home, you can inoculate your seeds with your home compost. Grab a scoop of your compost, especially if it's got a lot of different things in it. If you're adding leaves and dried things from your garden and a mix of different stuff into your compost, then you can just rub some of your compost. It's going to have a lot of great native microbes on it. Just rub some onto your seeds or put a little pinch into the hole as you're seeding your seeds in, and that's going to help give them that start. So when we're talking about ongoing maintenance, we're here toward the end of my spiel. So we're almost getting ready to do some questions, but we talked about the ongoing maintenance, and what we're doing long-term in the garden is what's going to be the most important. It's, yes, there's establishing the garden, but it's how we treat it every year, every season, the way we're thinking about the garden, that's the most important. So instead of fertilizer, composting at home. So we already mentioned getting the compost pile going. I would definitely encourage that if at all possible. Using those inoculant products, which require much less plastic than, say, doing a fertilizer weekly or every other week. And cover crops to feed your soil biology. So we can fertilize via some of these cover crops. There are cover crops for lots of different needs. And if you want to learn more about cover cropping, we do have a whole class on cover cropping on our website. But the idea is that you can use cover crops for different things. So say I was going to do, this is an example because we looked at it already, hairy vetch, and I did that hairy vetch in the fall, and then I terminated it in the spring. Hairy vetch is a legume, so it is a wonderful one for adding nitrogen. So if I've been adding my nitrogen and then I go in the right after frost and I go to plant in my tomatoes have a bunch of nitrogen present in the soil to utilize. I didn't have to add any nitrogen. And actually, I didn't even have to do that alfalfa fertilizer recipe when I do that first. So that's a great process to start doing instead of fertilizer. Living roots in the soil as much as possible. Keep your soil covered. So I don't care what it is, what you have access to, as long as it's not plastic, right? But if you have access to anything, right? We have pine needles. No, they will not acidify your soil. That is a myth. If you have pine needles, you can use them as mulch. Grass clippings, dried grass clippings, as long as they don't contain a lot of weed seeds. Cover crop residue, again, is my favorite. Pine shavings, you can use any of those things as a mulch. but best to stick with an organic mulch, something that is going to provide organic matter and break down into the soil, which again, that landscape fabric cannot do. And then decrease your exposure to tempting advertising messages. It can be very easy to get dragged into, there's any number of things that we get bombarded with now, which is like, oh, look at my great tomatoes, or you have to apply this, or this is going to be the thing that will change your garden. We get that clickbait stuff all of the time. Think about where it's coming from. Does the person who's telling you to apply a tomato fertilizer every week, are they selling you that fertilizer? Do they sell that in their store? Because they might have a vested interest in trying to get people to purchase this, even though adding something like excess phosphorus to your garden is actually going to decrease its performance over time. So think critically about where you're getting these messages from. And then I just like to end with this one, which is, in the 40s and even before that, we grew more than 40% of our food at home during Victory Garden time. And back in the 20s, it was even more than that. And we did not have any of these products, these fancy things that we have now. It is doable. We can do it again. It is within reach. And I hope that this set you up to feel like that what a couple alternatives are in the meantime. And I think that's it. That's my spiel. I'm ready for questions. Whew.
All right. That was awesome, Briana.
That was really good. I learned a lot.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
There is one question that has come up above every single other question out there, and that is the question of how did you terminate your hairy vetch cover?
Yes. Yeah. Hairy vetch is a tricky one. It's, it's one of the ones that I call like an advanced level cover crop. So when people are starting out with cover crops, there's one that I like to recommend, which is oats and peas. And I like to recommend that one because it's easy to terminate. So there's a couple things you should look at when you are thinking about planting a cover crop. One is timing and one is terminating. What is your chosen method of termination? What do you have in your toolbox? And hairy vetch is one that can be tricky if you don't get it at the right time. So with all of these cover crops, your backup method is always going to be tarping. Okay, if your method of termination fails, know that you always have tarping as a backup. It's not my number one. It's not my favorite way of termination because again, there's plastic involved in that. But if things really go awry and you don't kill it, you can always tarp it for a couple of weeks and that'll kill it. So don't panic with that. But we terminated our hairy vetch with it's just an angle iron, which is a piece of basically cast iron. They use to attach brick to houses. We tie a rope to it and then I just stomp it down along as I go. And then it dies off within a couple of days and you can plant into it within a week. But you have to do it at the right time. So it's all timing with termination via crimping, which is what that's called. That's all about timing. It has to be at flowering stage. If you try to do rye, for example, and this is where I see a lot of people have problems with cover cropping, is they try rye, which is like a grass. And if you try to terminate rye with crimping at the wrong time, it does not work. And then you end up with grass in your garden bed and you're mad at me because you said this would work. Research the timing for termination and research the best methods for terminating that cover crop before you even plant it.
Yeah. Fantastic. And can you describe just briefly for those who aren't familiar with tarping? Are you talking about just a tarp from Walmart? Like what?
Yeah, yeah.
How does that work?
Ideally, it's something you already have. If you don't have to buy new plastic, use what you've got. You could use a black tarp, a clear tarp are going to work best, but it could be just a clear sheet of plastic. If you have a small area, you can probably cover it with, a sheet of plastic that you have saved over from wrapping something else. We have big sheets of plastic I save from, things I've gotten shipped in all the time. But ideally, it's something clear or something black because you want the heat of the sun to be able to get in there and help kill it and smother it out.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have lots more questions.
I know. I'm watching them.
All right. We have one here from Krista. Says, do you have recommendations for where to find plastic-free containers for those growing in a townhouse? Is burlap the best option?
I know, if you have the ability to get a terracotta or a ceramic pot, that is always my top choice. Because yes, burlap, when I'm talking about burlap or jute or wool as an alternative to a grow bag, those are temporary growing situations. It's not going to last you a long time. So you're going to be spending, not as much as a terracotta pot, for example, but not too far off either. So if you can afford it, spring for the terracotta pot, spring for something that's going to last a little bit longer, because the natural materials, again, they are not going to last as long as a polyester grow bag. I'm not going to lie to you and say they're going to last as long. They're not. But you're not going to have the plastic contamination concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes sense.
And yes, I saw that someone said you can use cardboard or plywood too to smother things out. And while yes, you can, it doesn't work quite as well because the heat doesn't generate the same heat as a tarp does. And that heat is what helps terminate those cover crops. So, but it will work if you leave it long enough.
Yeah. All right. Caroline here says, I would like an answer to this question. What material can be used to line wood framed raised beds to slow the rot of the boards?
Yeah, you don't have to. So on our channel, we have a whole video about waterproofing wood beds. And it's the same method that we talked about with the wood trays, which is Shosugiban. You take a torch, propane torch. You see they have the handheld ones. They sell at your big box store. Torch the sides. So you want to char it till it's nice and dark. Then you just apply an oil to the inside, like a linseed oil, and that will waterproof it naturally. I would not recommend applying a plastic or anything like that to the inside of raised beds. I know that's often recommended. I personally would not, and we haven't on our raised beds, and they've lasted quite a long time. I think we're on year 6 using the same cedar bed. So, but I don't really even put a container. Again, I don't believe that you have to have sides. I think aesthetically, a lot of us want sides to our raised beds, but it's not strictly necessary.
Yeah. That's very interesting. We'll have to try that out. Do you know how that works like in really humid environments as well? Because I know in Colorado, you're pretty dry.
So it's a Japanese method, and Japan is fairly humid. So they're an island, and that's where it originated actually as they do it on the sides of on the side of their houses. And so, it's pretty effective from what I hear.
We should try that. We gotta give it a try.
Yeah, we have a video hitting our YouTube channel tomorrow showing how we build those wood seed trays, and it includes that Shosugiban method. So
love it. All right. More questions here. How long does it take to remove the microplastics that are in the soil?
More than our lifetimes. Unfortunately, that's the downside. And that's where, there is research being done about, microbes that do break down microplastics. The problem is they're not able to really necessarily keep up with the plastic contamination that's happening in our soil. So say that the only microplastic contamination we had was from our water. That's a lower rate than if we were growing, say, in a plastic grow bag, or had plastic landscape mulch on top of our soil. That rate is much lower. So when we're seeing, again, the research isn't quite there yet here in the US. There was a study done, I believe it was in the Netherlands last spring that came out in 2024, and on plastic landscape mulch in strawberry fields. And they looked at 2 fields side by side, same soil type, same everything else used. One field had landscape fabric applied for 4 years, one had not. And what was really interesting was not just the microplastics that they found in the soils that was mulched with landscape fabric, but also the rate of phthalates that was in the soil. And not only were the phthalates in the soil, there were 3 to 5 times the amount of phthalates in the strawberries grown in that soil versus what was not. So it's really a perpetual problem. It's a lifelong issue in the soil. Don't panic. What I hate is when people get done with these sessions, they're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing everything wrong. No. It is never too late to change and to say, okay, yeah, it's cumulative. So I'm going to make that change this year or next year. And I'm going to, dedicate that I'm not going to use my landscape fabric, or I'm not going to use the plastic grow bag or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But don't be defeatist about it, right? That defeats the issue of growing healthy food, all of this stress that we have all the time. I want people to have the best methods and to know that there are ways to get around this, but also don't stress yourself out by thinking like, oh my gosh, this plastic is in my soil forever. I mean, realistically it kind of is, but the more microbially active your soil is going to be, the better as well.
Yeah, there was someone that asked along the same lines. They were asking, like, is there any microbe or fungi or something that will break them down?
Yeah, the research is still coming out kind of on that. So I would definitely be, I'm really interested in seeing what's coming along with that. It's just the concern is always when we're adding something new. So when we're adding something that's not native to an ecosystem, even if it's on the microbial level, what impact is that having amongst the soil food web, right? So introducing anything new on a large scale, like we would for some kind of new fungi that could be breaking down plastic, like, is that going to have a side effect to something, you know, the butterfly effect throughout the soil life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very, very interesting. Deb Powell's asking, what about silicone?
Yeah, I've heard questions about that one a lot. You know, I haven't done that much research down the silicone route myself. I'd be interested to hear what anyone else has done. They don't, for me, they don't, my silicone molds, like I have a silicone mold that I used to make our soap, you know, and it lasts pretty well, but I have not used it for seed starting. I can really speak to it.
Yeah.
If you guys do, please feel free to chip it.
I can't speak to it a lot, really either, except that it is plastic.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is. Yeah. And that's where, you know, when in doubt, stick to as close to nature as possible is what I always say. And even when we do the soil blocks, try to avoid growing on a plastic tray, right? So a lot of people soil block, but then they soil block in a plastic tray. And it's like, well, then there's alternatives like cookie sheets. We use fiberglass trays that are like cafeteria trays from restaurants. You can use metal tray. Really, you could use wood trays. Even I believe Elliot Coleman used to use wood trays with his soil blocks.
Yes. Yeah.
So again, this is not a new concept. There are alternatives, but if you are trying to do plastic free with the soil blocking, particularly, try to avoid the plastic trays. Is what I would say.
Yeah. I used to be probably one of those. I think a lot of people confuse silicone in that because in the marketing industry, it's almost marketed as a plastic alternative type scenario.
Yeah.
And I think I even used to think of it kind of as a plastic alternative.
Right.
And then we designed an electric kettle that was plastic free, and someone found silicone in it, and we're like, oh no.
Oh no.
Because we had a manufacturer that was doing it, and we didn't realize that as part of the process they put some
Right.
silicone in it.
I think what's so hard is that we have so little insight into what's happening during a manufacturing process. You know, we just don't really know. And even a lot of these recycled plastic seed trays, if you say like, well, what's in this? They can't really tell you what kind of plastic it is. It's just recycled plastic. Like, well, I'm not sure what this is. And it's the same for things like cardboard. You know, there are a lot of concerns with like what's in cardboard. I've heard both ways that it's perfectly safe. I've heard that people who work in the cardboard industry say they would not use it on their soil. So it's one of those things, when in doubt, I don't trust it. Which I don't want to seem like a conspiracy theorist, but.
Yeah. Understood. All right. Another question here from Susan. It says, what about using plain organically made Hessian? Is that how you say that?
I don't think I know what Hessian is.
I'm not entirely sure either.
Huh.
So we'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
It says, which is good as mulch because eventually it is eaten by worms. So we'll have to check that out, Susan, see if we can.
I thought it was something kind of like burlap. But
oh, it's a woven fabric made of vegetable fiber. Oh, like jute. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So we've tried like using burlap before, for example. The problem is that burlap has a wide weave, and so it doesn't perform the same way that we think of like a true weed. It's not impermeable. There's a lot of light that comes through. So I use burlap. Say if I'm germinating a cover crop and it's very dry, or we have a lot of temperature fluctuations, I'll use burlap to help insulate the soil, but I use it because the light can still infiltrate it. And so I can still get germination, which makes it kind of not work as well as a weed barrier because you're still getting germination of weed seeds. But if we're using burlap for anything else, definitely, I'll use it as a to keep squirrels away from certain things. I use burlap for like everything else in my garden, or wrapping tree trunks. It's safe to use. It's just not as effective as a weed barrier.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
You could layer it. If you did multiple layers, just on a market farm scale, I think financially it wouldn't make as much sense, which is why I really started doing the cover cropping or growing my own mulch, is because that was way less work. I didn't have to, buying seed is relatively inexpensive. Applying seed is relatively inexpensive relative to what it was costing me to haul in and buy in enough compost and to apply that compost. That was actually quite labor intensive compared to a cover crop and growing my own mulch. So
yeah, makes sense.
So Alexander's asking about the wooden trays that you, and he's asking, did you use soil blocks in those trays, or what were you using in this?
Yeah, so I create, I kind of create my own blocks in those trays. So I just layer in soil, I wet the soil, and then I use a big old putty knife, about this wide, and I just cut, you can use a knife or whatever you have. I just cut out cubes, and then I seed start within those little cubes and transplant them. I take a spoon. It's very rudimentary and also kind of fun. I just grab a spoon and I scoop them out and I transplant them in that way. So I'm not actually soil blocking in what we would think of with the blocker, because bottom watering in a wood tray is very difficult. So that's the question that I get, is how do you water those? I if I'm doing a seed tray, it's top watered. And so it's a little bit tricky with the soil blocks. But we have found that if you use tongue and groove, so we've used cedar tongue and groove, which is designed for like ceilings. If we build our wood trays with that, it's a much more one piece of a bottom. So in that case, you probably could soil block in your wood trays. And Elliot Coleman does do it. He's just magic, and he's able to work it out. And good for him. And I haven't quite gotten there yet.
His wood trays are open on one side.
Yes, so he can tip it, right?
Yeah.
My question is, how does he keep it? So what I do really like them for is you can't overwater a wood tray. So there's so much more low maintenance for home gardeners, because you can't overwater them, and underwatering them is also difficult, because the wood it holds on to a little bit of the moisture, but it also lets that moisture out. So you can't overwater them like you can a seed tray, or even a soil block. You can overwater, and they hold the moisture much longer. So I can go almost a whole week without watering those. So you can actually go have a life, take a vacation or whatever it is, and go out of town for the weekend and leave your seedlings, and they'll be okay. Unlike a little soil block sometimes.
Yeah. All right. One more question related to that one with the trays is, what are the yellow trays made out of that you
Those are fiberglass. Yeah. Those are fiberglass seed trays. So they're not seed trays. And as far as I know, no one else was really using them when I started using those. I thought that they were the same ones that everyone was using, because I had seen people using trays that looked like that. But what those ones were plastic. And when I got these ones, they were from a restaurant that was going out of business down the street, and they had them all outside for $1 a piece. So I bought all of them thinking that they was the same trays. And then I come to find out that these were fiberglass, which they are from 1996. So they have been they're over 30 years in rotation right now, or around there, and no sign of aging, no sign of deterioration. They're food safe. They're used for heating up food. So they're technically fiberglass cafeteria trays is what we use.
Interesting. Do you put holes in them for drainage, or?
Nope. So when you're watering the soil blocks, you bottom water, and then the great thing about those trays is they're very sturdy. So you can pick the whole thing up. It doesn't fold, and I could hold a whole in one hand, and it doesn't bend or break. You just tip out any extra water. So if you do happen to overwater, you just kind of tip it out, and it'll just drain it.
That's awesome.
I did see someone asked about plastic milk jugs. We did just talk about this, that just cold frames. So if the winter seed sowing, plastic milk jugs are not really UV rated. They're not really meant to be used in the sun. So what happens is people find they shatter after a season, or even in the spring, and then they kind of leave little shards all over the garden. And that's just what we're seeing. So if you can, again, not against winter sowing, guys, do what you have to do. But the fiberglass is treated, by the way. I saw someone is that fiberglass is dangerous. It's coated. Anywho, if you can, just do a wood tray, put an old window on top, and then you're creating, this is right, a cold frame. It's as old as time. People have been doing that for a long time. You can winter sow in a cold frame just like you can in a jug. So that's what we do if you're concerned about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you, Briana. So many people on here that are excited about what you have shared, and let's give Briana a hand in the chat. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
I'm very inspired by that.
I don't want anyone to feel, again, disheartened, or I think it's just good to know that there are alternatives. Use what use what you have. And right now, I think given our current environment, just grow food. Okay. Whatever you have to do to grow your food and try not to stress too much about all of this. But if you are concerned about it, there are ways around it, I think is where I would leave it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for those last words of encouragement. I think that that's really pertinent for people coming away from this to, take baby steps, take those steps, and then you're working towards an end goal. We're all working towards end goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Every single one of us, and none of us are doing it 100% in the ideal. I mean,
right.
we still
use drip tape. Like we haven't found any alternative to that. So
yes. Yeah.
We have to use it. We're in desert. So do what you can in the places that you can, and don't stress about every single thing.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. We'll see you.
See you.
Bye. Huge thank you to Briana for sharing such an amazing session. And as you guys know, our mission here is to make gardening and farming easier for you. And so that's what we're doing here with this summit, with these free sessions, bringing experts just like Briana on here so that you can learn from their expertise and go and take that knowledge and put it to practice in your garden. And so please, what you have learned here, take something, even if it's just one small thing, and go put it to use in your garden. At the same time, we don't want to just leave you with expert insights and knowledge and expertise and tips and tricks, but we also want to give you tools to put that to use and to make it a lot easier for you. So like Briana was sharing, she uses Seed Time on her farm, and we want Seed Time to be a tool that literally anyone can use to get started growing their own food. So if you haven't yet gotten it, go grab your free Seed Time account, because there's a free level for everyone so that you can get started with. And then also, many of you have been asking about replays. We have replays available for free for a limited time during the summit. And then we also have a very special little opportunity for you to grab lifetime access to own the replays as well. So I'm going to bring up a slide here really quickly and just walk you all through what comes with the upgraded level of access to the summit recordings as well. So right now you can own the summit for $100 off. You can grab lifetime access to the Seed to Harvest Summit recordings. And here's what's included when you grab that access. We have two different packages here right now. You can jump on with lifetime online access to all of the recordings of the summit. And that includes this session and all of the other ones. And then we also are splitting out MP3 audio versions of those as well. So if you like to listen on the go, if you like to listen podcast style while you're out in the garden, gardening, or on the road, that's a great way to digest the sessions as well. We're going to pull out the transcript. So if you're a reader and you want to just skim through and read it, you can do that. And then for the fun of it, we're going to be throwing in the chat logs, because there's all kinds of great questions. You all are adding so much value to this as the community of the Seed to Harvest Summit, and we don't want that lost either. And then at the platinum level, we're also going to throw it all onto a physical flash drive and ship that to your door. So if you like a physical copy of it, if you don't want it just in the ether internet, but you want to have it for yourself in a physical copy, that is what we have the physical flash drive there for as well. And then, like I was saying earlier, we don't want you just to come away with expert tips and tricks and tools, and which, by the way, take all of these experts and go to their YouTube channels, learn more from them. But we don't want you just to come away with that, but to also have the tools to go put it to use. And so we are also at both of the packages, we are giving you 1 year of paid level access to Seed Time, which is the garden planner that we have developed over the years. And Seed Time makes it extremely easy to easily visualize what to do and when to do it in your garden or on your farm all year round. You get a calendar based on your location. You can set your frost dates, and then it makes it easy to add crops to that calendar. You click the Add Green Crop button up at the top right. You can choose which crop you want to grow, and Seed Time will give you automated suggested timings for that crop of when to seed it, transplant it, expected harvest time. You click schedule, it will drop that planting into your calendar. So here's this one with seeding, transplanting, harvest time. And then the power of Seed Time is that it's completely adjustable. So you can come in, you can move those plantings around, add succession plantings. You can add plantings in the spring, you can add them in the fall. You can plan out your entire season the way that you would like it to go. And then you can come on over to the layout planner in Seed Time, lay out your garden beds, and then take those plantings and walk through your season and place them where you expect them to grow, where you're planning for them to grow in your garden layout. And then watch this little green slider here and the crops down below as we move it forward. You'll see that the crops come in and out of the spaces that they're going to be growing in based on as you walk through the season. So it allows you to track both time and space in your garden so that you can easily see when spaces open up and you could add another crop in, or add a cover crop, right? That you could then come and crimp down later on. And it allows you to really maximize the space that you have for growing, as well as maximize your yield, is really the ultimate end goal solution. And then with Seed Time, you also get a task list that makes it easy to stay on task throughout the season, because it automatically pulls a task list from your calendar. So you simply come in on a daily or weekly basis and check off those tasks and adjust them on the fly. You also get a journal to easily keep track of your notes and observations. You can log pictures, you can link them over to plantings and come search filter them, etc. You'll get the classroom, the community, the Seed Time store. You get 20% off in the Seed Time store as well. There's a whole lot that you get with your paid level access to the Seed Time platform as well. And then in addition to those bonuses at the platinum level, we have 3 more extra bonuses for you. One is 1 year of free bonus online access to our flagship home gardening course. This is the first course that we've ever created for gardening, 12 modules over 18 hours with worksheets and teaching and demonstration videos, walking you through a lot of step-by-steps of how to prepare your garden beds without breaking your back, how to trellis your plants, how to start your seeds and transplant them successfully, how to deal with pests and diseases in natural ways, how to extend your season without breaking your pocketbook. There's a lot built into this course, and you get 1 full year of access to it. And we're planning to redo the videos in this course this year, so you'll get new updated content as well. In addition to that, we're also including bonus sponsor session recordings. These are a $50 value, and we're going to be throwing those in for free as well, and lifetime access to them. These are extra sponsor sessions that are not going to be aired during the main portion of this summit. And they include, for example, the microbiometer, where they go through talking about how healthy soil is alive microbially. We've been talking about that a lot. And then they also walk through a very simple little tool that you can use to test the microbiological life in your soil, how much bacteria, how much fungi, etc. is in your soil, as well as Diego from Modern Grower has a whole session on season extension with tunnels and covers and a comprehensive guide to season extension. So you won't want to miss that. And then one last bonus at the platinum level here, and this is some exclusive unaired garden trainings that aren't going to be aired at all during the summit. for this little promotional period for the summit. But you will get access to them at the platinum level here. One is Michael Kilpatrick, a really great friend of ours who has done a whole session on growing ginger and turmeric. And so that will be available if you are interested in growing ginger and turmeric. You definitely won't want to miss that. And my friend James Fry has this Revolution garden bed setup that grows food 2 times faster. It's kind of wild. You can see on the left-hand side is a regular raised bed. Right-hand side is this Revolution garden bed seated at the same time, and it just grows plants like bonkers. And he walks you through exactly why and how. It's pretty cool. So those are all included at the Seed to Harvest Platinum package level. So you may be wondering, how can I grab the recordings and own the summit? Right now, the Platinum is $298 at full price, but during the summit, you can get $100 off for just $198. And the gold level here is $198 at full price, but you can, once again, get $100 off for just one payment of $98. And you can have the peace of mind knowing that you can come back and review this information over and over and over again in any of the different forms that are there. So if you're ready to get started, we do have a link that we pinned up to the top of the chat, or you can go to seedtoharvestsummit.com/lifetime and grab your recordings there. We are backing them up with our 30-day money-back guarantee. We just want to be as amazingly customer-friendly as we possibly can. So we want to take that risk off of your shoulders, put it on our shoulders, and either Seed Time makes it a lot easier for you and the summit adds a ton of value to your life, or shoot us an email within the first 30 days and we'll back you up 100%. At the end of the day, we want to just be that helping friend that helps take your garden to the skies. Like Linda here, who says, I've never had such great vegetables. Karen, thanks for answering our questions, giving tips that work. Scott, by far our best garden ever. And my crazy garden has been amazing this year, grew in size and abundance. Joelle, so much produce. We want you to have the experience of Roy Kim, who said there was a very noticeable difference in the amount of fruitage this year compared to last year. Or James, who said the kale and collards did well all winter. I ate fresh greens all winter long. So if you like the idea of having a continual harvest of fresh food all year round, that is what we are here for, to give you the tools, the training, the expertise, as well as the tools to be able to put that to use without constantly trying to figure it out on your own and guesswork and flying by the seat of your pants. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this last slide up here for just a second for those of you that want to grab that QR code or the link. And Dad, did you see any other questions in here?
Yeah, Pat just wants a link to get the free account.
Yes, to get the free account, you can go to seedtime.us. You can go to our main home website page and you can grab your free account there. It literally is free for everyone. And what we mean by that, sometimes the hardest things to sell is something that's free, because people are like, what? I don't believe you. I don't believe it's free. It actually is free. Like, you literally, there's no credit card required. There's no trial period. You can use it forever. It's like a Gmail account. The Gmail account actually is free.
Just go sign up.
Yeah. Now, there are some pretty nice little bells and whistles at the paid level, which obviously, we just walked through of what you can get with the recordings here. And that includes being able to add your own custom crops and varieties, being able to use the layout planner and lay out your garden and walk through the season and track time and space like we were talking about. And we have some pretty amazing future releases coming down the line as well. So great question. And Carrie is asking, who created the software? We are the creators of the Seed Time software. But to tell you the honest truth, we like to say that it's this Seed Time community that has really been the one that has created the software, because it's a community funded project. You guys fund it. In fact, the summit recordings, like if you want to be part of helping us continue building out Seed Time, like that's going to go back into helping build out the platform more. And it's a community experience together that has brought us to where we are today. And we couldn't ever do anything without you all. So that's where the software comes from. All right.
And I mean, it's not only their money, but also their ideas and suggestions. that
Yes, your
have played a big
ideas,
role.
your suggestions. We are constantly looking for user feedback because that's how we know what to build. Like we're not 100% geniuses that can figure out everything. We need you. You all are the geniuses that tell us, hey, this would really work a lot nicer if I could do X, Y, or Z. And then we take it back to our developers and we say, yeah, let's do that. Let's make it the way that you guys said, because that's what's going to actually, what you'll end up actually using is what you come up with yourselves. So, all right. We're going to wrap it up for this evening at that. Any other questions that we missed? I saw one person said they had a $10 coupon that they're trying to figure out how to use. If you are not seeing that $10 coupon in your email, we have a little onboarding series in Seed Time, which you get a bonus $10 coupon, seed coupon, if you finish the onboarding series of videos. And if you don't see that in your email, just email us and we'll make sure that you get it 100%. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Let's have a quick little glimpse into tomorrow, which is our last day. Tomorrow we have Audrey Crawford talking about growing tomatoes in Zone 9, and she's going to be walking through how to grow tomatoes basically from A to Z. Bootstrap Farmer is going to be talking about seed starting and setting you up for success with starting your own seeds. Melissa Norris, top garden crops for food preservation, how to fill your pantry from your backyard. So not going to want to miss that one. And Kaylee Richardson is going to be talking about top 5 medicinal herbs for your garden. So if you like herbs, that's going to be a fun one. And we're going to wrap up the day with David Stelzer from Azure talking about growing grain on a small scale. I am very interested in that session.
How about growing your own?
I would love to grow some of my own grains.
Your own wheat for your own bread.
Yes.
Sounds great.
Let's do it. Homemade bread. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to wrap up for this evening. Go grab your Summit package. Go grab your free Seed Time account. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And good night.
Good night.